And joining us now to discuss the Laken Riley Act is John Koufos, former criminal trial attorney and president of Cottage Four, a consulting company for policymakers and companies. John, thank you so much for joining us. Now, to begin, if the Laken Riley Act passes, states will be able to sue the federal government if it, for one, failed to conduct proper background checks on would-be immigrants, which then harms the public. Now, this would give states more power in matters of immigration policy. Do you see states playing a much larger role in immigration enforcement if this bill were signed into law?
I think what this is a guard against the immigration policy that we've seen over the past 4 years, which has not prioritized public safety. I think we're going to see a different type of immigration policy under President Trump, something similar to what we saw during the first term. The important part of this is, that it gives the ability to detain people who commit what some may call low-level burglary, theft, and larceny offenses. But the idea here, the idea of detention, all that does is trigger the same process that people here illegally would have to go through anyway. So to answer your question to this, if the state AGs will sue more, they might, but only if the federal government doesn't do its job.
Hmm. Now, a senior fellow of the American Immigration Council says the bill would give federal courts in certain states the ability to impose bans on issuing visas from countries like China. What would that mean for the U.S. immigration system? Would that complicate it, streamline it?
Yeah. So, I think that that's sort of a little bit of hyperbole here. So, in order to do something like that, what would have to happen is the state attorney general would have to sue the Secretary of Homeland Security and say that the issuing of such visas present some sort of public safety risk or public safety harm en masse, right? That's not really going to happen here. The reason this provision, I think, was put into the law was because we had an unresponsive immigration system for the better part of the past 4 years. So if you were an attorney general in a border state or in a state where folks were being flown to, what happened is you bore the brunt of the crime problem much at a much greater rate than your other states, but you had no ability to defend yourself from the federal government or have them fix it. So I don't think that issue of wholesale bans against countries, I think that's just what advocates on the left were saying to try to stop the bill from being passed. The law doesn't seem to flesh out that way.
Hmm. And how do you think this bill, if signed into law, would hold up against a legal challenge?
Yeah, so there is some state sovereignty issues that could come up. But I think overall, the ability for immigration and ICE, excuse me, to detain people who commit crimes is broad. They have that authority now. They did not have that authority for theft offenses and things of that nature. But really, what most people who are panicking about this on the left don't realize is that once you're taken in, even on a burglary or theft, all that happens is you go up before an ICE judge for a bond, an immigration bond, just like you would or should in most state courts in America. So I don't think we're going to see, this sort of rounding up of people and massive detentions. I think what's going to happen is we're going to be able to detain people who are committing crimes in this country. We're going to be able to get a closer look at them while they're in custody, pre-bond immigration bond hearing. And then ICE will make the determination whether this person is ultimately a public safety risk and should be sent back to their country of origin.
Now, some Senate Democrats have already endorsed the bill, like Senators Ruben Gallego, John Fetterman, and Mark Kelly. Others say they're open to discussing how to improve the bill and amend it. Now, you've worked on bipartisan criminal reform bills under Trump with the First Step Act. Why do you think we're seeing this level of bipartisan support for the Laken Riley Act on a topic, immigration, that was much more partisan a few years ago?
Yeah, great question. And I think that the unfortunate tragedy that befell this poor woman, for someone that shouldn't have been here in the first place, I think has really galvanized people. And I think the other things, the political trade winds have changed. I think that progressives a number of years ago would have voted against logical immigration reform in a lot of ways. I think we saw 9 still holding out, including the 2 from my home state of New Jersey, which is unfortunate. But I think today people are understanding that the open borders that we've had for the last 4 years are not serving our country well. They're not serving us economically. They're not serving us from a public safety perspective. And I'll tell you, as someone who has worked on legislation with Democrats and Republicans across this country, issues like immigration make it harder for us to change laws that really could benefit a lot of people and be smart on crime, because people don't want to tolerate criminal justice reform when we have an immigration system that is letting people out without even checking who they are. I mean, just one last piece here. When you think of the murderer of Laken Riley, I mean, here's someone who was caught at the border, paroled and released into America. He was arrested in New York City for endangering the welfare of a child, right? A class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail. Then he was arrested for theft in Georgia. Then he killed and raped Laken Riley. So, the public safety consequences are quite acute here and have to be addressed.
Now, expanding on that, tough on immigration policy used to be quite a divisive issue, but as we saw during the election, more people are looking at this favorably. Of course, you do still see some states doubling down on support for, say, sanctuary city status. But how much of this shift do you attribute to the concerns people do have about heinous crimes being committed against Americans like Laken Riley?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, right? And I think we're seeing too much of it. In New York City, we had the poor person who was from New Jersey who was set on fire while she was sleeping on a subway. I mean, we're seeing these things all over the country. Go to any courtroom in America and look at the uptick in driving without a license, right? Those sorts of other quality of life offenses, and other safety offenses. People are tired of it. I think we all saw the videos in New York City where they arrested people who were here illegally, and they were giving the middle finger to the police as they were being marched out of the police station. I mean, people are taking a different tack, and I think that as we realize we're in a more dangerous world, we also have to be very aware that open borders aren't just for people who are going to commit murders and street crimes or thefts. These are for, like, this is a conduit for terrorism. If we don't close the border, if we don't handle the border logically, what's going to happen is terrorists are just going to walk right through, and God knows what they're going to do in this country. All of us were around during 9/11. I was in New York City during that. I was in law school at the time. And we all know the consequences of what an open and unchecked border can be and do. And other countries simply don't have that, right? Other countries enforce borders very, very strictly. We simply do not.
John Koufos, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.